Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications. The following interactive performance is a first-round entry in Chilling Tales for Dark Nights 2025 Evil Idol Voice Acting Competition. And you, listener, get to help decide who advances to round 2. Voting is simple. Following the performance, simply click the thumbs up icon on this video if you'd like this contestant to move forward, or the thumbs down if you'd like to see them be eliminated. Voting on this entry will conclude 1 week after the date of its posting. Thank you, and good luck to all of our contestants.
Part 1. Sarah couldn't remember the exact moment the fever began. It might have been the second night back from the hospital, or the third, when the baby wouldn't stop crying and Dan had given her that look. Not irritated, just tired in a way she didn't know how to meet. He hadn't said it aloud, but she'd heard it anyway. You need to get better. She didn't feel better. Her skin was warm and damp most of the time, as if the sheets were holding her heat and refusing to let it go. Her eyes ached. Light made her squint. She moved from the bedroom to the nursery, as if walking underwater, her steps slow and uncertain. She'd stand over the crib and forget what she came for. She was still bleeding some days, and not others. The book said it was normal. So did Dan. But something wasn't normal. Not in the house, and certainly not in her. It started with the sound. That rustling. At first, she assumed it was mice. It was an old house, after all. Dan's aunt had lived here alone for nearly 30 years before she died in her sleep, her body found weeks later when a neighbor called about the smell. They hadn't talked about that much. They had inherited the house, mortgage-free, a gift too good to refuse. But Sarah didn't like the house, even before the fever. Something about it felt constricted, as if it had once been larger and had shrunk in on itself. The upstairs hallway was narrow and dim. The nursery was tucked at the end, small and wallpapered with soft floral patterns in faded gray and beige. Sarah hated the wallpaper. Dan had said it gave the room character. She hadn't had the strength to argue. The rustling came from behind the nursery wall. It was subtle. No scratching, no squeaking, just a steady flutter like dry leaves caught in a breeze that never reached her skin. She put her ear to the wall once and listened. The sound stopped immediately. Then something tapped. 3 soft, hollow knocks, as if someone inside was warning her off. That night, her fever spiked. Dan pressed a cool cloth to her forehead and told her she was just run down. The doctor had said postpartum fever wasn't uncommon, especially after an emergency C-section. But when she asked if Dan had heard the sound in the nursery, he hesitated too long. "I think you're imagining it," he said finally. "You've barely slept." Maybe he was right. She'd only gotten 2 hours the night before, maybe less. Time bled together now, meals forgotten, showers skipped, her body still foreign and leaking in ways she hadn't anticipated. The baby was healthy, at least. They slept a little more each night and cried a little less, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something watched them from the corners of the room. On the 5th day of the fever, she dreamed of the woman. She stood in the nursery, holding the baby, swaying gently under the glow of a bulb that flickered like a candle. The room was wrong in the way dreams always are, Walls too tall, door too far, shadows too deep. Sarah turned toward the crib, but it was no longer empty. A woman stood inside, curled within it, with her knees drawn to her chest, long hair clinging to her shoulders. Her eyes were open and white. Feathers stuck out of her back in uneven clumps. Some looked broken, others bloodied and bare. The woman stared up at Sarah with a hollow smile. "You opened the door." Sarah woke, gasping, the sheets soaked beneath her. She turned toward Dan, but his side of the bed was empty. She found him in the kitchen, barefoot, bottle warming, half asleep on his feet. When she told him about the dream, he only rubbed his eyes and said, "You've got to stop watching weird stuff before bed." "I didn't watch anything," she protested. Dan sighed. "Then maybe it's time you called the doctor. You're scaring yourself." She didn't take his advice. Instead, she peeled back a section of wallpaper. It started small, just a corner near the floor in the nursery behind the rocking chair. The edge curled easily, revealing old plaster beneath. And something else. There were lines, painted in faint brown and rust red. At first, she thought it was just damage from age or water. But then she saw the pattern. Wings. They were unmistakable, large and curling upward. They weren't just painted, they were detailed. Veins traced through feathers, stains ringing the edges, as though the image had bled over time. She covered it quickly when Dan came in. He didn't notice. The next day, while he ran errands, she peeled more. A second mural emerged, this one higher on the wall, behind the changing table. A row of figures with their heads bowed, hands clasped. Their faces were faint, smudged as if erased. But the wings remained. Every figure bore them, except one. The last figure in the row had no wings. Instead, long gouges marked its back. Blood poured down to the floor. And around her, smaller figures knelt in prayer. Sarah stepped away from the wall, dizzy. That night, the fever returned. Her vision blurred, her skin flushed and itched. She wrapped herself in damp cloths, whispered nonsense under her breath, and tried to stay awake. But the dreams came again. This time, the woman in the crib was humming. Sarah couldn't move her body, only her eyes. The woman leaned over her. Her mouth didn't open, but Sarah could feel breath on her face, hot, sour, and rhythmic. "Fever is a blessing," the woman said, voice like moth wings tearing. "Illness opens the gate." When Sarah woke, the room smelled of mildew, not just faintly, strong enough to sting. She checked the baby, still breathing, skin hot to the touch. She almost called the doctor then, but something stopped her. Instead, she went back to the nursery and pressed her hand to the mural. The plaster felt warm. That evening, she told Dan about the wings, the murals, the woman. She wanted him to go upstairs and see for himself. But Dan only looked at her with quiet concern. The same look he gave her in the hospital when she said she didn't want to hold the baby right away. The same look she saw when she cried in the car on the way home, shaking and apologizing. "Sarah," he said carefully, "this isn't you. You're still recovering. I think we should get some help." He meant well, she knew that, but it didn't matter, because the moment he left the room, the walls creaked, and the rustling returned. The next morning, she found another mural. She hadn't uncovered it. It was just there. The wallpaper had peeled itself during the night. This one showed the woman again, no longer kneeling, no longer trapped. She stood with arms outstretched, her eyes wide. From her back spilled hundreds of wings, tattered and fluttering like dead leaves in the wind. Below her, a crib, empty. Sarah touched the wall and felt her temperature rise again, her vision blurred. She stayed in bed for the rest of the day. Dan brought her soup, sat with her for a while, but she could feel him pulling away, gently, like a man retreating from a burning room. Later that night, she whispered to the wall, "I don't want you here." The rustling stopped. Then came 3 soft taps, measured, deliberate, close, and a voice like steam from a crack in the floorboards. "We made room for you." Part 2. The following morning, Sarah woke drenched in sweat and utterly clear-headed. It was the first time in nearly a week that her fever had broken. Her skin felt clammy but not burning. Her thoughts were no longer slow or tangled. The light filtering through the bedroom curtains looked less like a threat and more like proof that the world still moved outside these walls. For a moment, she thought maybe she'd imagined everything, that the fever had scrambled her brain and planted symbols behind plaster. But when she went to the nursery, the murals were still there. The peeling wallpaper had curled even farther during the night, hanging like old bandages torn loose from skin. Beneath it, the wall revealed more of its secret procession. Dozens of winged figures now stretched across the plaster, all moving toward a central point. An arched doorway painted in faded reds and yellows. In its center stood the wingless woman, arms raised, face turned away. Sarah stepped back, uneasy. She thought about calling Dan, but he'd already left for work, his footsteps muffled and quick as he moved down the stairs that morning without waking her. He hadn't even checked the baby, who still slept soundly in her crib. Her fever was gone too. For now. She spent the morning tracing the wall with her fingertips, trying to decipher the age of the paint. The plaster was cracked but intact. It didn't feel like part of the house's decorative history. It felt buried, covered, hidden with intention. Behind the changing table, a section of wallpaper had peeled at the seam. When she tugged it gently, the panel came free with almost no resistance. Beneath it, she saw something not painted but carved. A narrow slit in the plaster. Sarah ran her fingers over it and felt an edge give way. A draft slipped through, cool and stale, with a faint scent of paper and mildew. She pressed again, harder this time, and a rectangular panel popped inward with a soft click. Behind it, a cavity in the wall, no larger than a drawer. Inside, a bundle of old cloth, a yellowed envelope, and a small, leather-bound diary. She pulled everything out and set it on the floor. The cloth unwrapped into what looked like a christening gown, hand-sewn and crusted with age. The lace was browned in places, brittle and fraying. Inside the envelope, folded parchment sheets crackled as she opened them. Letters in faded cursive, written in a woman's delicate hand. She scanned the closing signature on the first one. Marjorie Elkins, March 1874. Sarah stared at the date for a long time. There was no address, nor was there a greeting, just a string of short, desperate paragraphs, some smudged, others legible enough to make out. I have begun to fear the angel listens too well. She took Jonah's fever, yes, but she watches the child still. They told me never to speak the prayer aloud. that she hears through breath, through blood. I do not know what I have invited." Sarah sat back and opened the diary. The first pages were mundane enough. Marjorie wrote about her husband Jonah and their struggles during a fierce winter. Their child, unnamed, had caught scarlet fever in February. By March, Jonah had also fallen ill. The town was losing people quickly. The doctor had stopped coming. And then the entry shifted. They said she answered prayers before the church was built, that she was the reason people stopped dying, not God, not medicine, her. She was sealed in by the nuns, walled up behind the old altar when the town turned on her. Not a punishment, a sacrifice. She agreed to it. They painted her wings on the wall so the fever wouldn't forget. But wings rot in the dark. Sarah swallowed, flipping ahead. The entries became jagged, disjointed. Some were written in the margins. Some were interrupted by furious scratching. I left the crib open. She stood over him, not touching, just watching. I buried the wings behind plaster, one in each corner of the room. She can't leave unless she finds them all. I still hear her in the wall, pacing. She's growing restless. She wants out. Sarah set the diary down and stared at the nursery wall. The mural hadn't always been a mural. It was a prison. Later that day, she tried to show Dan. He came home with groceries and a headache, muttering something about layoffs at the office. She waited until he'd put the baby down, then took him to the nursery and pointed to the mural. "Look at this," she said, pulling the wallpaper back farther. "These aren't just decorations. They were covered on purpose. I found a diary in the wall, Dan. There's more behind the plaster. Writings, symbols. This house has a history nobody told us about." Dan rubbed his temple. "Babe, please, not tonight." "I'm serious. This isn't postpartum psychosis or fever dreams. Someone lived here during an outbreak. She thought there was something in the walls. She sealed it in." Dan shook his head and turned toward the door. "I really need to sleep." She didn't press him. Not then. Instead, after he went to bed, she returned to the nursery, alone. By flashlight, she searched the corners of the room. If Marjorie had hidden things behind the walls, feathers, wings, whatever they were, there might be evidence in the plaster. And she found it. Behind the dresser, in the northeast corner, a seam ran up the wall at a shallow angle, just wide enough to suggest a hidden cavity. She tapped it with her knuckles. Hollow. She ran to the kitchen, grabbed a steak knife, and came back, carefully wedging the blade beneath the seam. After a few minutes of gentle pressure, the plaster cracked. Behind it, wrapped in a muslin cloth, was something thin and curved. She tugged it free and unwrapped it, breath hitching. A wing. Small, no longer than her forearm, but unmistakably shaped. Not from a bird, the feathers were too fine, translucent and pale gray, like ash that had held form just long enough to dry. She gagged and dropped it on the floor. The wall pulsed beside her, not literally, not visibly, but she felt it. That night, the dreams returned. She stood in a cathedral made of rotted wood and plaster, the ceiling sagging inward. Candles burned along the walls, dripping wax onto faded murals. And at the front, nailed to a wooden beam, was the woman. She was still. Her arms were stretched wide, each hand pierced with a rusted nail. Her back was raw, the wings gone. Only scars remained, long, deep, gaping wounds that wept dark fluid. "You peeled me open," the woman said, her lips not moving. Sarah tried to run, but her legs wouldn't respond. The woman's eyes were white and wet. Behind them, fire, smoke, screams, 1,000 fevers flickering behind bone. "One more wing, one more corner, and I'll take your child gently." Sarah screamed herself awake. Dan wasn't in bed. She searched the house. Kitchen, empty. Bathroom, dark. The baby still slept, bundled in her crib, cheeks pink with heat. No note, no sign of a phone call. His car was gone from the driveway. She tried to call him. No answer. For hours she sat on the couch, rocking, waiting for him to come home. He didn't. That night, she returned to the diary. There were only a few entries left, scribbled so quickly the ink had bled through the paper. Jonah offered himself. She left the child untouched. That was the pact. The last feather buried in his chest before he turned to stone. The mural moved today. I think she's winning. I pray to nothing now. I pray only that no one else finds her. As Sarah closed the book, something creaked above her. She looked up at the nursery wall. The mural had changed. It hadn't moved. It had updated. The figure of the wingless woman was no longer alone. Beside her now stood another, a man with no face. His arms were outstretched, body painted into the wall as if mid-embrace. In his chest, a small, feathered shape protruded from a wound that hadn't been there the day before. Sarah stared at it until her vision began to blur. Dan was in the mural. Or something wearing Dan's shape. Part 3. The fever returned on a Thursday. Sarah had barely slept. Her joints ached. Her scalp itched. Every sound in the house carried weight. Creaks that echoed too long. The shuffle of unseen things that didn't match any room's layout. The baby wouldn't stop crying. Her face flushed deep red, fists clenched as if fighting something invisible in her dreams. Dan was still gone. She'd left voicemails, texts, even called the police claiming her husband hadn't come home. They said they'd file a report if he didn't return by morning. She didn't tell them about the wall. She didn't mention the mural, or the diary, or the voice she heard every time she closed her eyes. She already knew how that would sound. Instead, she sat in the nursery with her daughter pressed to her chest, whispering lullabies that weren't hers, songs she didn't recognize, but that came easily, with words she didn't remember learning. Little wings and powdered bones, carried up where fever roams. The baby stopped crying when she sang that one, but afterward, she found a blood smear on the crib's rail. Not fresh, thin, dark, dried into the grain. She'd scrubbed it with peroxide, but it left a shadow behind. That evening, she collapsed. Not just from exhaustion, something deeper. She was sitting at the edge of the bed when her muscles simply gave up. Her knees buckled, her vision tunneled, and she slipped to the floor with a sharp cry. The baby was in the crib, safe, but Sarah couldn't move. The room tilted and flickered. The walls shimmered like wet parchment. Then the angel stepped out of the mural. She came slowly, not walking but peeling forward. her body moving free from the plaster in stretches, skin folding like paper, bones cracking gently as she took shape. Her face was wrong, not monstrous, but off, like a sculpture that had been melted halfway and left unfinished. Her eyes were too round, her mouth didn't move, her arms hung limp at her sides, but her back... Sarah focused on that, because it was the worst part. There were no wings, only 2 open wounds, gaping and wet, as if something had been violently removed, not days ago, but continuously, over decades. They pulsed when she breathed, and the air grew hot when she came close. The angel knelt beside her. "You brought me breath," the thing said, though its lips didn't move. "You peeled my sleep away." Sarah tried to respond, but no sound came. Her body wouldn't obey. "You broke the seal," the angel whispered. "But not with your hands, with your fever. That is how I was made, called into light, stitched by heat, worshipped by the sick." It raised one pale hand and touched Sarah's forehead. A flush spread through her skull. Her vision cleared momentarily. The walls glowed faintly with pale gold script. The angel turned toward the crib. Sarah gasped. The baby had vanished. "No," she croaked. "No, no, no." But the angel only smiled. "I took nothing. Not yet. The child is still yours. But she burns. Soon you will beg me to take her." And then Sarah was alone again. She clawed her way to her feet, skin blazing with heat, and stumbled to the crib. The baby was there, eyes shut, lips parted, cheeks too red. Her chest rose and fell, but faintly, too faintly. Sarah scooped her up and ran to the bathroom. She stripped the child bare and ran cool water over her back. The baby whimpered, but didn't scream. Her skin steamed beneath the flow. Sarah cradled her close and whispered prayers she hadn't spoken since childhood. The fever lingered. That night, Sarah reread the diary. There were more entries than before. She could swear they hadn't been there yesterday. One was dated the day before. But the ink was just as faded as the rest. "The angel needs no name, only breath. She is the space between coughs, the hunger beneath healing. She feeds not on flesh but on flame, the fever that makes gods of mothers and martyrs of children. I dreamed I gave her Jonah's lungs. They crumbled in her mouth like ash. He smiled at me with black eyes and said I'd done well. There is one more wing, still buried, but I fear if I find it, she will take my son to make up hair." Sarah closed the book and pressed her fingers to her own scalp, searching for clarity. Her thoughts had started drifting. Random sentences interrupted her inner monologue, lyrics, rhymes, whispers. And worse, she was beginning to understand the angel's language. It wasn't Latin, not exactly, but it shared cadence, root structure, sounded like prayers left out in the sun too long. The more Sarah listened, the more the house seemed to speak back. The next day, she moved the crib into the master bedroom and sealed the nursery. She used nails, screws, and tape, covered the doorframe in kitchen salt, drew protection glyphs from the diary, not because she believed they'd work, but because she needed something to do. Dan still hadn't returned. The police stopped answering her calls after the third voicemail. His phone went straight to voicemail now. The murals changed again that night. She didn't have to check to know. She felt it. The angel was closer, hungrier. Her daughter cried every hour, her breath short, her limbs limp. Sarah rocked her for hours, whispering her name, though the child still hadn't been named officially. Some part of her had waited, like she'd known on some level that giving the baby a name would make her real enough to lose. On the fifth night, Sarah dreamed of feathers. She stood on a hill of blackened down, all soft and smoldering. Every step sent up a flurry of ash and heat. Below her, a procession of women marched toward a pyre. They carried infants in linen bundles, singing softly, eyes hollowed by exhaustion. The angel stood at the top of the pyre. Her body cracked and gleamed like glazed ceramic, white fire oozing from the holes where her wings had once been. One by one, the women offered their children. One by one, the angel refused them. Until Sarah stepped forward. She did not carry the baby. She carried herself. And the angel smiled. When she woke, the nursery door was ajar. She swore she'd sealed it, nailed it shut, salted it, and marked it with charcoal. But it stood open, wallpaper fluttering, the air from within hot enough to warp the hallway's paint. Sarah stepped inside. The murals had finished their transition. The figures now turned towards the center of the room, all kneeling. Their faces were clearer now, mouths open in songs of praise, eyes blank and radiant. At the far wall, the angel towered above them, no longer a prisoner. She was enthroned, and at her side, Dan. Painted, stylized, but unmistakable, his face serene, his hands raised as though lifting something above his head. And what he held... Sarah staggered. He held a bundle, a small, swaddled form. The baby. But it wasn't fear that filled her chest. It was something worse. Recognition. The mural was not showing the future. It was showing the trade. Sarah stepped back into the hallway, panting. Her daughter's cries echoed down the hall, shrill and short. When she reached the master bedroom, the crib was empty. She screamed, tore the blankets off the bed, flung open the closet, searched beneath the furniture. Nothing. The child was gone. Then she heard humming from behind the wall. She pressed her ear to the plaster. Her own voice whispered back. Little wings and powdered bones. She dropped to the floor. She didn't cry. She didn't scream again. She just sat, her back to the crib, and let the air settle around her. The wallpaper in the bedroom began to peel. She didn't stop it, because something inside her had shifted. The baby was still alive, somewhere. And the angel didn't lie. She wanted the trade. Sarah stood slowly and walked to the nursery. She opened the drawer where she'd hidden the gown and letters and folded them into a pillowcase, along with the diary. Then she packed a basin with cold water, strips of cloth, and a small votive candle she found in the drawer beneath the sink. She'd seen it in a vision. That candle mattered. When she returned to the nursery, the angel was waiting. Not fully emerged, half in the mural, half out. Her head tilted. The scent of rot and roses filled the room. Sarah approached and said nothing. She knelt before the mural and unwrapped the cloth from the wing she'd found earlier. Then she began to hum. Not her lullaby. Theirs. The angel swayed gently. A second wing protruded from the wall behind her, bone-thin and unfinished. Sarah picked up the diary and read aloud the final entry, one she hadn't dared to read before. She needs the final piece, yes, but she also needs a mother to accept it, to give willingly. The wings grow from sacrifice. The body matters little. The moment I offered myself, she stepped back. It is not blood she takes, but pain, transfigured. A mother's willingness is the holiest thing of all. Sarah looked up. I'll do it, she said. The angel opened her arms. Part 4. The angel did not touch her. She didn't have to. The moment Sarah whispered, I'll do it, the room changed. The walls stopped breathing, but the air thickened with heat, like a fever breaking in reverse. The plaster bubbled behind the murals. Paint cracked and peeled in thin ribbons, curling toward her like tongues tasting for truth. Sarah didn't flinch. She stood, leaving the wing and diary on the floor, and walked to the back wall, the one with Dan's painted face. His likeness stared outward in devotion, eyes uplifted. The child in his arms was still just color, symbol, promise. She pressed her palm to the baby's painted forehead. The wall gave under her hand, soft and pulsing. Warmth spilled through her fingers, and beneath that warmth, there was a faint rhythmic sound. Faint and rhythmic, a slow fluttering, like wings brushing cloth. Behind her, the angel emerged. The sound wasn't footsteps. It was a peeling, stretching, sliding of matter, skin separating from structure, limbs unfolding from sleep. Sarah didn't turn around. She kept her hand on the mural, whispering the lullaby again, louder this time. The angel hummed with her, and the sound made the walls shiver. When Sarah finally turned, the angel stood fully outside the wall for the first time. She was taller than Sarah remembered. Her legs were too long, and her spine curved backward, like something built for flight but denied it. Her back twitched with absence. The wounds were there, open, but no longer bleeding. Instead, they thirsted. Each was a vertical hollow lined with faintly glowing tissue, hungry mouths where wings once grew. "You'll take me?" Sarah said. The angel tilted her head. "I already have." Sarah waited for pain, for dissolution, but it didn't come. Instead, the angel stepped forward, reaching not to hurt but to embrace. Her arms folded around Sarah in a loose, ceremonial motion. Sarah went rigid, every instinct firing, but she didn't move. And when the angel's skin touched hers, it wasn't cold. It was fever warm. The kind of heat that seeped in slowly, not to burn but to change. Beneath it, her thoughts stretched thin. Her name slipped loose from the center of her mind. She felt her spine align with something not physical, as if her body was no longer hers, but being mirrored by something ancient and larger inside the house. The murals lit from within. Every winged figure glowed faintly, outlines shimmering as if caught between worlds. Dan's mural blinked, and Sarah gasped. His eyes moved. For the first time since he vanished, he looked at her and smiled. "You chose well," the angel whispered. Sarah dropped to her knees. The angel vanished. Not with a blink, not with a burst. She simply stepped backward, merging once more with the mural, her limbs folding in reverse, her body flattening into paint and shadow. And as she receded, the baby's mural self began to blur, fading slowly, like dust blown from glass. When it vanished completely, Sarah ran to the bedroom. The baby was in the crib, fast asleep, breathing peacefully. No flush in her cheeks, no fever, her skin cool and even. Sarah didn't cry. She couldn't. Her tears had dried somewhere between the last wing and the dream of the pyre. Instead, she lay beside the crib for hours, staring at the ceiling, whispering promises she didn't fully understand. The next morning, she buried the wings. One in the garden beneath the black-veined roses that hadn't bloomed since they moved in. One beneath the stairs, wrapped in the christening gown. The final one, the one the angel had given back to her, warm and feathered and strange. She pressed between the pages of the diary, then slid it behind the false panel in the nursery wall and sealed it shut with wax. For days, the house was quiet. Dan didn't return. His phone remained dead. No activity on his credit cards. No sightings. The police left a voicemail saying the case had gone cold. Sarah didn't follow up. The murals stopped changing. They faded with the week, becoming dull, their figures retreating beneath the old floral wallpaper, as if ashamed. The angel's throne dimmed to outline only. Her wounds, still visible, no longer bled. The figures who worshipped her now looked away. Sarah didn't enter the nursery for 3 days. When she finally did, the air was still warm, but no longer oppressive. The crib stood empty, unused. She picked it up, carried it into the master bedroom, and never spoke of the nursery again. Instead, she created a new space downstairs by the fireplace where the light could reach. She filled it with soft blankets, sunlight, and songs that didn't rhyme. And every night she sat beside her and whispered, "I was your offering, but you were my salvation." On the 6th day, she found the final note. It wasn't in the diary. It wasn't written on paper at all. It had been burned into the inside of the nursery door. Letters faint and black, not carved, but etched by heat. Wings are only earned in fire. A mother burns more brightly than saints. She closed the door gently, sealed it with glue and paint, and never entered again. Dan's name faded from the mailbox. Her last memory of him was not of flesh, but of color and prayer and peace. She'd stopped asking herself whether it was really him in the mural, whether he had chosen, whether he had suffered. Some trades, she'd learned, were beyond fairness. The angel never returned in full, but Sarah felt her sometimes, especially during storms, when fevers rose in the child, when shadows curled along corners. She would feel that hunger stir and then subside, like a creature half asleep in the walls, waiting for a different mother to forget what she was worth. Sarah didn't forget. She made tea from salt and sage. She burned the diary's cover in the stove. And when her daughter turned 1, she gave her a new name, a name not in any book, not spoken by the nuns or whispered in the walls. And from that day on, the child never burned again. Part 5. The angel did not come again, not fully. But Sarah knew she was still there. Sometimes the pipes exhaled heat even when the furnace was off. Sometimes the crib creaked under the weight of something not visible. And some nights, when her daughter stirred in her sleep, a hush passed through the nursery, not like silence, but like reverence. Sarah had not forgotten her promise. She had meant it. Every word. She had offered herself in place of her child. And yet the angel had not taken her. Not then. Not completely. It wasn't gratitude. It was patience. The trade, she realized, had not been rejected. It had only been deferred. The fever returned 3 weeks later, this time in Sarah. It began in the joints, a slow, crawling fire that lived beneath the kneecaps and elbows. Then came the tremors, shivers, violent and unprovoked, even beneath blankets. The baby, now wide-eyed and bright-cheeked, watched her mother quietly as she sat rocking on the floor, sweat beading on her forehead. The child hadn't coughed once since the offering. Sarah didn't tell anyone. Dan was still missing. The police had filed him as presumed voluntary disappearance. There was no funeral, no search. His mural remained, faint now, almost erased beneath repainted walls, but she could still make out the outline of his hands raised in offering. She didn't repaint the nursery again. Instead, she returned to it, nightly. Each visit was shorter than the last. She would sit just inside the doorway, never crossing the midpoint of the room, and whisper. Sometimes she brought the diary. Sometimes she sat in silence, waiting for the warmth to gather. The angel never spoke again. But the walls listened. Sarah understood now what Marjorie had meant in those final entries, what it meant to offer oneself not out of fear, but out of understanding. This was not martyrdom, not sacrifice. This was inheritance, and her daughter would not carry it. The final night came in spring. Rain tapped against the windows. The baby slept soundly in the room below, lulled by a lullaby that Sarah had not sung, but which drifted up from the cracks in the floorboards. A borrowed voice, a remembered tune. Sarah stood in the nursery, barefoot, fever-bright, gown soaked through with sweat. The room was warmer than ever before. The walls shimmered faintly, as if the murals had returned beneath the paint, their outlines pressing forward like trapped breath. The angel was not there, but Sarah didn't need her to be. She stepped to the center of the room and lay flat on the floor, arms outstretched, palms open. Her back arched slightly. Her body trembled. She began to hum, not the lullaby, but something older, something given. The ceiling above her cracked faintly. Dust drifted down like ash. The air pulsed once, then again. She felt something tear. Not flesh, not quite, but something between skin and soul, a seam that opened from spine to shoulder, slow and clean. No blood, no pain, just pressure and then release. Heat surged through her lungs. Her heart slowed, then surged, then slowed again. And then, stillness. The murals returned, not in pigment or brushstroke, but in shape. The walls bloomed with warmth. Light shivered from the corners, and there, in the center, was a new figure, with its wings outstretched and its eyes closed. Her. The mural bore her likeness perfectly. Skin, hair, even the small scar on her cheek from a childhood fall. But the mural Sarah had wings, vast and translucent, like heat made visible. Each feather shone faintly, etched in silver and rust. Below her, in the curve of one open wing, the shape of a cradle. Inside, a swaddled child. The painting didn't move, didn't flicker, but it breathed. And from then on, the house no longer whispered. The walls no longer peeled. The temperature held steady, and the baby grew strong. Neighbors said Sarah must have run, another mother unable to cope, perhaps. Left the child, disappeared into the storm. But the baby had been fed and clothed and was safe in her bed, clean, warm, and smiling when they found her. There were no signs of trauma, no signs of struggle. Only a faint scent in the nursery, like incense and dust and something older than fire. When the officers pried open the sealed panel in the wall, they found no body, no diary, just ash, feather-shaped and fragile, resting in a shallow groove. The mural was gone again, but sometimes, just before storms, heat rises inexplicably in the old house. The new owners say it's the insulation or the old wiring. But their baby sleeps peacefully, and their fevers never last long. And behind the wallpaper, if you peel gently enough, the wings still wait.
Thank you for listening. I'm your host, Steve Taylor, reminding you that if you haven't already, don't forget to cast your vote for this contestant via either a thumbs up or a thumbs down vote. New entries will be posted throughout this month. Be sure to tune in and vote for each of them and help decide who becomes the next evil idol. Until next time, turn off the lights and turn on the dark.
Chilling tales for dark nights.